Welcome to AP Biology, and today we are focusing on ATP. Simple, I know. All right, let's go.
So today we really have one goal. All right, we're going to be looking at ATP, this molecule that we've talked a lot about, but today we're going to see how ATP drives all work. When we talk about work, is work endergonic or exergonic? It's endergonic. You need energy to do work, right? So work is endergonic, right? It requires energy to do work. And that energy is going to come from ATP. You know, you always say that you consume carbs for energy. You consume lipids for energy. But do carbs and lipids actually power any chemical reactions in your body? No, they do not. There's only one energy molecule that powers life, that is used to do work, right? And that is ATP. So when we look at work, work is going to fit into three different categories. Three types of work that can be performed within the cell and within your body as a whole. Number one is chemical work. Chemical work is making bonds. So what reaction are we talking about? Hydrolysis or dehydration? Dehydration synthesis, right? So making chemical bonds, performing dehydration, that requires energy. That is work. Transport work. What kind of transport requires energy? Active transport, right? Sodium, potassium pump. Proton pumps. Active transport is a form of work. It requires energy. You have mechanical work. Mechanical work is physical moving of stuff. The first thing that pops into my mind when I think of mechanical work is muscle contraction. Do you remember the little motor proteins walking along the microtubules? That is another good example of mechanical work. Right? I've been meaning to show you this. I have a little video of what a motor protein looks like. Let's check it out real quick. It's really kind of cute. Should we give it some sound? Look at it. So this is a microtubule. This is the motor protein. This is the vesicle. All right? Yes. And this is literally what's happening inside of your cells. It's going a lot faster than that, but that's what's taking place. I'll show it to you one more time. Right? Look how cute it is. All right? He's walking along the microtubule. And what do you think is powering that motor protein?
ATP.
ATP, right? That's another good, look at it. That's a great, I'm still amazed that that's actually what's happening inside of your cells, right? That is a good example of mechanical work. Yes, Joe?
So is this happening in real time, or is that...
No, it's actually ridiculously fast.
I was going to say there's no...
There's a separate video that shows you like the speed of how fast it would be moving, and it's pretty ridiculous. So that's slowed down dramatically, right? But that's how vesicles are moved within the cell. Pretty cool.
Wow. I like it.
So all of these forms of work are powered by ATP, right? ATP is going to power work through a process called energy coupling. What does it mean to couple something? To couple something is when two chemical reactions are paired together. You have an exergonic reaction paired to an endergonic reaction. And that should actually make a lot of sense to you. What do exergonic reactions do? Do they release energy or consume energy? They release. So you have an exergonic reaction, release energy. And what do you think the energy released from the exergonic reaction is used to do? To power the endergonic reaction. So it makes a lot of sense that these two chemical reactions would be coupled together. The exergonic reaction releasing energy, and then that energy released goes right here, right, and is used to power the endergonic reaction. So we call this process energy coupling, right? And that is where ATP is going to be used, right? ATP is going to be used to couple chemical reactions together. Now, it's important that we know the structure of ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So if you look at ATP, it has a nitrogenous base. It has a sugar called ribose, and it has attached to the ribose 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. Do we all see that? Now, if you remember way back when, I taught you about a monomer that is made up of a phosphate, a sugar, and a base. Does anybody remember what that monomer was? Phosphate, sugar, base make up a nucleotide. Remember nucleotides? DNA and RNA, right? So if you look at ATP, it's actually a modified RNA nucleotide. The reason why it's RNA is because it uses ribose and not deoxyribose. So if you look at it from here, phosphate, sugar, base, this is a nucleotide. And I would write down that it's a modified RNA nucleotide. Oops. It's a modified RNA nucleotide. All right? Basically, it's a nucleotide that has an extra 2 what? Groups? Phosphate groups. Now, ATP is super rich in energy, right? And I want you to write something down and to think about this. I was watching a show last night, and in the show last night, they were using dynamite to blow up the side of a mountain. Now, would you say that dynamite is rich in energy or poor in energy? It's extremely rich in energy, right? Extremely rich in energy, explosive energy, right? Do you think that dynamite is so rich in energy because it is very stable or because it's very unstable? Unstable.
The more unstable it is, the more energy.
Thank you. The more unstable something is, the more rich in energy it is. Does that make sense to all of you? So, like, instability equals energy. So, do you think that ATP is very stable or is it very unstable? It's very unstable. And that's what makes it so powerful. That's what makes it so rich in energy. Now, let's look at where that instability is. Look at those 3 phosphate groups. You see them next to each other? Notice, what charge do all 3 phosphate groups have? Negative. Do you think that negative likes to be next to negative?
No.
No. Just like a magnet, right? Positive likes to be next to negative. Positive sticks to negative. But negative to negative does what to each other? They repel each other. So you have these 3 phosphate groups that are bonded together that are repelling each other. And that makes the bond between the phosphate groups right? That makes the bond between the phosphate groups extremely unstable and therefore extremely rich in potential energy. Because of its location or because of its structure? Because of its structure. Ellie, go ahead.
How did they bond together in the first place to propel each other that powerful?
Well, it requires, this is where cell respiration comes in, right? This is why we consume carbohydrates and lipids. When we break down carbs and lipids through cell respiration, the energy released from their breakdown is used to join them together. But you're right, it takes a very specific enzyme, and it takes a lot of energy to make the ATP because they don't want to be next to each other. Right? Good question, but that's the whole point of cell respiration. So, how do you release the energy found in ATP? You cut off the last phosphate group. Bam. Cut it off. How do you cut a bond? Hydrolysis. So ATP releases energy through hydrolysis of what we call the terminal phosphate by cutting off the third phosphate group. And when you cut off the third phosphate group, you go from having ATP to now having ADP. Right, it's ADP plus a phosphate group technically. And when you cut a chemical bond through hydrolysis, that releases what? Releases the energy. And in this case, you have a mass release in energy. I'm not sure if it's written down somewhere, but 7.3 kilocalories of energy, right? Through the breaking of that terminal phosphate, breaking of the bond, releasing that terminal phosphate. It is the hydrolysis of ATP that powers all cellular work. The hydrolysis of ATP powers literally every single thing that happens in your body. You need ATP more than you need anything else to be alive. Right? ATP, number one. Go ahead.
Okay, so what happens if we can't produce ATP? Is there something that can suffer it or no?
Well, you have some other energy sources. You use GTP, right? You have some other ones. But ATP is your major one. No, and there's no substitution. If you can't produce ATP, you have something wrong with you where you cannot produce ATP, you cannot sustain life.
So,
actually, that's how cyanide poisoning works. But we'll get there another day. It interferes with cell respiration and the production of ATP. That's what kills you.
Well, that makes it a lot less scary now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ellie. What's your question?
so if ATP is so, in regards to energy, expensive to make, does...
It's not. Its payoff is more than its expense.
Okay, no.
So I get what you're saying. What's the purpose of it? Its payoff is way more than its expense. And you have a really good question, right? And when we learn about cell respiration, you'll see why. You'll see what goes into the production of ATP, right? Very good question. So here's the thing that separates this from a lower level biology course. It's not just about the release of energy. The release of energy is just a part of how ATP works. There's really two ways that ATP is powering all work. One is through the energy release, and two is through that phosphate group. And now is where things are going to really start to build on each other. And we talked about this with cell communication. If you recall, when we learned about transduction, we talked about a phosphorylation cascade, right? Where each protein kinase gets activated through phosphorylation. Do we all remember that? And what did we say was there phosphorylating the protein kinase? The ATP. So the ATP doesn't just provide energy, it also provides phosphorylation. And if you remember, we said that phosphorylation is going to activate things. Phosphorylation is going to make things happen. Phosphorylation is like the on switch causing a reaction to take place. When something gets phosphorylated, we call it a phosphorylated intermediate. So ATP is going to perform its action by doing two things. Number one, it's going to provide energy. And number two, it's going to phosphorylate reactants, making them do whatever they are going to do. I have a really hard question. Usually nobody can answer this. Hold on for a second. Why do you think adding a phosphate group to a protein or to something activates that protein? Think about what we just said about phosphate groups.
Phosphate groups are inherently negative, and that negative charge in comparison to, let's say, like a more neutral or positive charge of a reactant can cause some sort of reaction.
All right, you're on the right path. And it's not necessarily that it's negative, but phosphate groups make something extremely what? Unstable. So you're on the right path, and your negative is contributing to instability, right? And that's what you were basically saying. By adding a phosphate group to a reactant, you are making that reactant more unstable, right? And when we say something is more unstable, you're giving that thing more what? More energy, and you're making it do whatever it's going to do, right? So you have two events taking place, and I keep repeating myself. One is the release of energy, and two is the phosphorylation event that's going to occur. So I have a chemical reaction on the board. Don't write anything, just look at the board, follow along, all right? So here we have a chemical reaction. You take glutamic acid, you're adding ammonia, and you're making what's called glutamine. To do this, you have a positive 3.4 delta G. So is that reaction endergonic or exergonic? It's endergonic, right? It's investing, it's consuming energy to put these two things together and to build something. Do we all see that? All right. Now we're going to take this chemical reaction and we are going to couple it with the hydrolysis of ATP. Do you understand all those words? So now you have a coupled reaction. We have the exergonic reaction of breaking down ATP and the endergonic reaction of putting these two things together. So the hydrolysis of ATP releases 7.3 kilocalories of energy. You have a negative delta G. Do we all see that? So here we have the hydrolysis of ATP. It's releasing 7.3 kilocalories of energy. The ATP phosphorylates one of the reactants, right? And that activates the reactant, making that chemical reaction take place. So what I want you to see, what I want you to get out of this, is that you have two chemical reactions coupled together. You have the hydrolysis of ATP releasing 7.3 kilocalories of energy, and that energy released is used to power this endergonic reaction. And the ATP is one, providing the energy, and two, phosphorylating one of the reactants. So if you look at the overall delta G, it consumes 3.4, it releases 7.3, so your net delta G is actually 3.9 kilocalories. So at the end of this entire thing, instead of consuming 3.4 kilocalories, this coupled reaction is actually releasing 3.9 kilocalories of energy. Joe, do you have a question before?
I was going to use the bathroom down there.
Go ahead if you need to. Aaron, do you have a question?
No.
No? What do you guys think? Do you understand this? So this hydrolysis of ATP, right, is going to power all chemical, transport, and mechanical work. Here's a really important picture for you to be able to recognize. Don't write anything, follow along. Right? You see this cycle of energy. So ATP plus water, because water is needed for hydrolysis, right? So ATP is going to provide the energy for all cell work. And once ATP powers the energy, what you're left with is ADP. So this is like your full battery. This is like your empty battery, right? So then it says here, energy from catabolism is used to take the phosphate group and add it back to ADP to regenerate ATP. Do we all see that? My question to you, this is a really good question to end with. Where does this energy come from to take the ADP, attach back the phosphate, and to regenerate the ATP? Where does that energy come from? It comes from your what? What did you say? Your food. It comes from your food. This is why you eat. What types of macromolecules did we say you consume for energy? Carbs and lipids, right? Anything but proteins, really. Carbs and lipids you consume for energy. And when you break down carbs and lipids, the energy released from these is what's used to regenerate the ATP. Do we all see that? And what is the name of this process that's used to regenerate ATP? What do we call this process by which you break down carbs and lipids and use it to regenerate ATP, Aaron? This is cell respiration. That is the whole point of cell respiration. This is the process that breaks down carbs and lipids and uses the energy released in order to regenerate ATP. You follow me? Now I used some important words that you need to recognize. Notice, Sean, this question's for you. Did I use the word make ATP? No. Because do you actually have the ability to make ATP? No. What do you do to ATP? You regenerate it. So you have all the ATP that you're ever going to have, right? It's just running in this cycle of being made, being broken down. Being made, being broken down, right? Which is why you need a constant supply of what? Food. Because if you don't eat, you can't regenerate ATP. And if you can't regenerate ATP, what happens to you? You die. And you will literally break down every single part of yourself to do this. You'll start with all the sugar in your bloodstream. Then you will break down all of your stored glycogen. And then you will break down your body fat. And as you're breaking down your body fat, you're taking equal parts body fat and equal parts muscle tissue. And then you will start consuming your internal organs, including your own heart. And this takes about 3 weeks. And after about 3 weeks of not consuming food and digesting, don't put away on yourself, all of your body, you have nothing left to make ATP. And then what happens to you? You're dead. This process takes precedence over everything else. because you need ATP to support life. Is that a good question?
Yeah, I kind of too. Is it possible? So we like can't create ATP. Is it possible to like lose ATP?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Also, is like that what happens when like people have like eating disorders like anorexia?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, I'm not done yet. Ellie, go ahead.
So is dehydration the opposite problem? Like you have ATP that you can't break down because you're not drinking enough water.
Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. You know, when you say water, you need water to be alive. Water is used for so many things, right? And you're right. It's including these chemical reactions like hydrolysis, dehydration. They involve water as well. So one of the things that I do every year is I kind of take the first marking period, I evaluate, think about how things are going, think about ways to improve, right? One of the things that I've noticed, especially on your last test, everybody did really well. And it wasn't that easy of a test. What does that tell me? One, that you were really well prepared. And two, a lot of you guys are getting better at test taking strategies. A lot of you guys are getting better at choosing the right answers. So I think that all of you know the biology. Some of you guys just are really bad at taking tests. And I think all of our practice, even though you can complain a little bit about the Pearson and the AP Central, I think that if you are doing it the right way, I am seeing the results. You are seeing the results. So I want to continue doing this. Now, what I would like to do, and I think that what happens with our lessons, we start off strong, and by the end you kind of fade. I feel like the last 7 minutes, in a way, you guys are done. I can see it on all your faces. Some of you guys are better indicators than others in terms of how you're doing. So I thought we would take the last 7 or 8 minutes of each class and work on a couple of practice problems that I have pulled from AP Central. Right? That might be things that I can't give you on a test, but are going to pop up on the AP exam. Just to do together as a group. Just as a way to close class, to open up your minds, to learn a little bit, and to continue our quest of becoming better test takers. Alright? Here we have a question. You know what? Before I do this question, I'm going to stop the video because this doesn't need to be on video.